What's one secret you and a parent have kept from the other parental figure? My stepdad and mom broke up. The day that my mom left, taking me with her, I went back into the house to say goodbye. I got along well with him. My mom is a bit crazy. I was young, middle school age. He was devastated and broke down, at first, crying. He told me that he had never told anyone this, but the reason he had issues getting along with my mom was because he was assaulted as a child, and he was sorry. He made me promise not to tell her or anyone. I never did. I always wondered if I should tell her, but keeping his secret was the only thing I could do for him, and I still cared for him a lot, so I never told anyone. I wouldn't even post it here, but sadly he passed away some years ago now. It was really sad. He was a nice guy, but it never would have worked anyway with my mom. My mom worked days, and my dad was on midnight shift, so meals were my dad's responsibility that week. One day, instead of cooking dinner, he took me to a funeral of an old teacher of his that had passed away, so that I could eat those little sandwiches, cheese and desserts. I rented Mike Tyson's Punch-Out when I was in 7th grade and kept it out until I owed $47. My mom slipped me the money to pay it off so my dad wouldn't go crazy about the money, which was a lot of money for us back then. If he'd found out, he would have prohibited me from running games for a while. I don't think he knows about it even now. When I was about 8, I was helping my dad put up Christmas lights on the second floor roof. This was the 80s. Safety didn't exist yet. He told me to get another strand and I walked to the edge. The roof was pretty flat, and I straight up slipped and fell off the roof and landed on the picnic table on the ground floor. My dad had no idea that I fell off until I yelled back, "I'm okay." He made me swear that I'd never tell my mom, and that was the last year we ever put lights up on the roof. My dad and I would wrestle for fun. He would pretend to let me win. Then he would get sudden strength and throw me into the couch. Well, on this particular day, he mistimed his throw and yeeted me into the end table. I was fine, but the lamp on the table was not. We cleaned it up and went to the antique store to buy a really similar lamp. Mom never figured it out. At this one time I forgot to lock my door one night and a drunk guy walked into my place. After I politely kicked him out, I called my dad and he was like, "Yeah, no, don't tell your mother, you'll give her a heart attack." My mom's cancer diagnosis. My mother was a very heavy alcoholic. With this she developed alcohol-related dementia, known as Korsakoff, Edit 4SP syndrome. She wouldn't remember things within a few hours of telling her. So when she was informed in the hospital of her terminal lung cancer and secondary bone cancer, she forgot and couldn't understand why she was so ill. We had to get home care help. This was in the couple of months leading up to last Christmas during the pandemic, so she passed away peacefully at home, and myself and my dad created a narrative that the nurses and care staff and to help her shower/wash, medication, etc. were all there to help her get better and to get her back on her feet and full health. She happily accepted the care and enjoyed her time with the carers and nurses who attended. Then just before Christmas passed away peacefully in her sleep, not knowing she was dying, but being looked after by her friends and family. First time I got drunk at a party, I was hammered and was scared to take a cab. Then I remembered my mom telling me I could always call her for help and she'd be there with no consequences. I called her and she picked me up. All she did was make sure I was safe and had enough water to not get as bad a hangover as I was going to. No blaming me for waking her up at 3 a.m. No chiding, just telling me she was proud of me for calling her for help. My dad, who'd most likely have a panic attack at the thought of me having been drunk, still thinks I was picked up because I was sleepy instead. Thanks, Mom. That when her mother died, it was not gently in her sleep. It was horrific, and I had to tell the doctors that her wish was no life-saving efforts. It wasn't a secret we kept long, but it does count. My mother is from Thailand, and a convert from Buddhism to Christianity. Despite this, my mother does have a firm belief in ghosts, especially in cases of sudden, violent death, as that is an everyday belief in Thailand. Kind of like living around bears or snakes. Yeah, I got ghosts. My dad bought a property of 30 acres for cheap from the state, and about 6 months and I visit him there. Around a campfire, he gets this mischievous look and says, "Don't tell your mother." But, apparently, the reason the property was so cheap was because the man who had previously owned it set his house on fire and shot himself with socks on his hands to try and make it seem like his wife had killed him. Socks burn away. No fingerprints. Gun. Voila. Framed for murder. Problem being, his house didn't quite burn fast enough, and the firemen put it out, found the body, and immediately pegged it as a suicide. He'd been going through a divorce and was a few aces short of a full deck of cards. My mother would have had a cow. Instead, she'd been living there off and on 6 months and there were no spooky hauntings. Eventually my dad did tell her, and naturally my mother immediately called a preacher to bless the property. I got lucky and found a Wii for Christmas the year it came out, but it was for me from my parents. Anyways, one day I'm home from school and Dad was home from work. We opened it, played Wii Sports all day and put it back before Mom came home. Frick, I miss him. I'm the one who got those massive dents in the back of the car when I was 17, backing into the other car they owned. It was not a parallel parking hit and run. My dad had me take a DNA test cause he didn't believe when my mom said I was his daughter. He didn't tell my mom. The gingerbread cookies on the balcony. Yeah, some of it was eaten by the birds, but not all of it. Sorry, Mom. My sisters and I found fantasy love letters to other men besides my father. I know they were fantasy, because she didn't even know half of the men and were happily married. They were all about her wanting to run off with these men and have their baby, and she had a hysterectomy after her last pregnancy. She would write them and wad them up and just throw them wherever. I'm surprised my father never found them. My youngest sister would scream at her, "Are you insane, Mother?" We just thought she was unhappy with my father and never said anything to him about it. I once took my kids to get ice cream. They were like, I don't know, 3 or 4. And I told them, "Don't tell Mommy I took you for ice cream." So the second my wife comes in the door, one of them says, "Daddy took us to get ice cream, but we can't tell you." Thanks, traitor. He didn't keep it for very long, but my dad found out I was having a suspected ectopic pregnancy before my mom. It was 3 days before Christmas and he came round to drop some bits off thinking I was at work. Instead, he found my hospital letter and me crying on the sofa, after only being home an hour. We're quite close, but not really affectionate, but he just helped me, whilst I sobbed and sobbed. He said, "I will tell your mom if you want me to, or I won't tell her, and if it's something you want to share with her then you can tell her when you're ready." In the end I asked him to tell her, but how he handled it really meant a lot. My mom's awesome, but she would have smothered me with love and not let me out of her sight, and I just wanted to forget about it. Anyway, he took me to all my follow-up appointments and on December 23rd we found out that baby was in fact growing away exactly where she was meant to be. She's 4 now. When my daughter was 4, she really wanted to play with the strings of magnetic balls I had on my desk. I know they say for children over the age of 12, but she was having a really good time. She came up to me about 20 minutes later meekly saying, "Daddy?" And I could see that the bottom of one was sticking out her nose, not knowing how many were up there. I gently used bigger magnets. I had to coax the whole string out. Was decided to never share any of that incident with Mom. My mom and Dad were arguing over what shade of brown to paint the house. My mom wanted a lighter color, too light in my and my dad's opinion, and Dad and I wanted a darker color. Of course, too dark in my mom's opinion. Well, when we had the painters come, they painted one side of the house in the lighter brown. My dad and I took one look and said, "Make the rest of the house darker." So they did. My mom came home and fawned over how great the house looks, not knowing 3 of the 4 sides of the house were not the color she wanted. That one lighter side is up against a bunch of trees and is close enough in color to the rest so it's impossible to tell unless you look for it or know it already. It's our secret and we will never tell, but everyone is happy with the house color. Lol. We've told her now, but at the time and for some time afterwards, my dad and I pretended that we went to visit my mother in hospital one morning just because we were both free. That Dad had had a meeting cancelled and I didn't have a class yet. Actually it was, because the hospital had called and told us that if we waited to visit her that evening, as we usually did, we might be too late to see her again. Apparently the mood lift off seeing loved ones can make the difference and did that day. The staff thought. She also thought we left after a couple of hours. Actually, she lost consciousness and we sat watching her vital signs monitors for most of the day. When she came to, it was her usual visit time and she didn't think anything of it. This was over 20 years ago now. She's alive and well. Few years back, on a ski trip, a few different friends and me and my wife got together. Some of our friends had kids. 3 kids aged 4 to 7. I'm a first chair, last chair person. I'm in line ASAP and go until I can't go anymore. Well, the group was getting tired, so I said I'd take the kids with me. I took them up the mountain way higher than the parents ever would have. We all got some good speed, but those kids were super good skiers. My niece, the youngest, got a bit out of control and was headed straight for the trees. I zipped over and caught her just before she hit the tree line. All 4 of us stopped, and even though the kids were young, they understood we weren't going to be telling moms and dads about anything, even though no words were spoken. Turns out the earliest memory my niece has is of that day. She doesn't remember the tree part, but her skiing with me up high is the earliest memory she can pinpoint. One of these days I'll let my Bill and SIL know what happened, but I'll wait for a few more years when the kids stop going up with Uncle Swinimxwin. My mom used to send my dad into my room to spank me. He would whisper to me that we were going to play a little pretend game to make my mom happy. He would tell me he was going to clap his hands, and I needed to pretend to cry like I was being spanked. I really didn't realize how awesome my dad was for doing that until much later in life. His own dad was pretty abusive to him, and he couldn't stand the thought of hitting a kid because of it.